Hey, it's Your Financial Maven, Samantha Besnoff, CPA, and after almost 25 years in the accounting world, I've decided to share my insights and passion about money. Knowing your money and hopefully feeling less stress about your money is what I call being financially empowered. Welcome to the Your Financial Maven podcast. Welcome to the Your Financial Maven podcast. I am excited today because I have another conversation with two people today with regards to financial literacy and talking about money. My guests today are Abigail Vacca and Kris Berthiaume. Both have a huge interest in financial literacy, and so in chatting with them and connecting with them, I thought it'd be great to have them on Your Financial Maven and actually talking about finances when it comes to moving in and being in a relationship, talking about home ownership, debt, retirement, things like that, with hopefully not fighting about it. As we know, talking about our money can be aggravating to each other, whether you have a partner, you're married, you're dating, but it's something we need to talk about. Abigail has a master's of social work, and you're an associate professor in human resources. You have firsthand seen how financial literacy should be a national priority to help alleviate poverty and stress in personal relationships. Kris is a high school chemistry teacher in public education, and you say that personal finance has always been a huge interest to you, and you're part of a group called Financial Independence Retire Early Community, or FIRE, which I'd love to talk more about in a little bit. And we connected because you guys are also co-hosts of the Global Treasures podcast. I think it can be found on Podbean and actually wherever you can listen to your podcast. I've started to listen to some of their episodes, and it's great. So I'm just so excited to have both of you here. So welcome to the Your Financial Maven podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
We're glad to be here.
I'm glad you guys are too. All right, so before we get into kind of that conversation with relationships and finances, and I don't care who answers first or how you want to answer it, but I want to know, what is money?
I think money is a gatekeeper. It gives you access to be able to buy things and pay bills, of course. And I've always thought it was really interesting that people call it a necessary evil. I know my parents used to always say that, and I used to feel the same way, but I've reframed my view over the years from seeing it as evil, quote unquote, to just focusing on the necessary part, because working for a nonprofit for so long, I see every day how we can use money that's spent and saved wisely to not just cover our own daily expenses, but use it for more of a philanthropic purpose to better our communities and just help those who need it the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. Talking about money is a taboo, and it shouldn't be. We have to have those conversations. How about you, Kris? What do you think? What is money?
I've got two very different levels of that answer, and I know that you ask all of your folks right away. So the first answer I have is very simple. It's a way to store trade. So before we had money, people would barter. However, with goods and services getting more expensive, you couldn't just save up 100,000 chickens for retirement.
Right. That would be a little hard, I think.
So it's a way of storing goods and services. But at a FIRE level, meaning financial independence, retire early, which you mentioned, FIRE level, there's two things in life, and that is time and money. One of those is infinite, and the other one is definitely finite. So you can trade the infinite one, money, for the finite one, time. And that's been my goal.
Interesting. And actually, I want to talk to you a little bit more about this FIRE community, how you got involved and what its purpose is and the guide of what it does, the Financial Independence Retire Early community, because it just seems so interesting to me.
I do want to warn your listeners, once you get involved in listening and reading about the financial independence movement, there kind of got its legs started by a dude named Mr. Money Mustache, who has a blog.
Okay.
And that gets a lot of people started out. And it's a way of thinking about money to not have to work again. Not saying you won't work again, but you don't have to. And that's what the financial independent part is. The retire early part is exactly that. Can you get to a point where your investments are paying you enough to live off of? And that's the whole pillar of financial independence. Now, there's probably 10 moving parts with this group of people that, again, once you research, I won't go into it now because that's a huge movement of people that get together, et cetera, et cetera.
And it's all over the country? Is this international?
It's definitely international.
Okay.
I guess I got involved with it through a podcast called Choose FI and another podcast that wasn't exactly fire, but their ideas are fire in nature. And that's the Rich Habits podcast.
And I think on some level, I think we all want financial independence. We all want to be able to feel financially empowered and be able to support ourselves. And it's hard. Times can be tough. But yeah, I think we all strive for that. And I do know you talk about finite and infinite. There is the thing about death and taxes. Those are things you can never get away from, right? So financially, if you can be independent, paying your taxes or managing that shouldn't be as difficult, hopefully, especially for small business owners, because that can be hard for them. All right, so I really want to get into the conversation and why I have you guys here today about talking about finances, with relationships, with moving in, debt, homeownership, things like that, and what you guys want to share with me about that, like your own experiences and kind of ways to do it without having those arguments. Or if you have those arguments, how to make it so that the relationship doesn't get broken. So Abigail, if you want to start, that would be great.
Yeah, I think I can start with talking about my views on retirement. So I have had a savings account, just to start off, since I was 9 years old. I had parents who were quite impoverished growing up, and they always had the mindset that they wanted to make sure that my sister and I had a strong foundation in savings and just always planning ahead because they were playing the catch-up game. They didn't really have their first 401ks or IRAs until they were in their 40s, really. And I'm really lucky in that regard that my parents drilled in the importance of savings because most of my friends had a very different experience. And my dad helped me open an IRA as soon as I could and always encouraged me to add to my 401k when I got my first full-time job up to at least what my employer matched. Because again, being in social work, I certainly didn't make a large starting salary.
But you make a good point that maximizing your 401k if you can. It's important if you're in your job and your employer has a 401k and they match it, to try to match it to the extent that they allow you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It always drives me bananas when anyone tells me that they aren't taking advantage of that match and putting into their 401k. Is there anything you want to add, Keith?
I have a completely lucky situation. So I've been in education for a quarter of a century, public education. And we're one of the last jobs that has a retirement plan, a pension. And that just changes everything. However, I got impressed upon early in my career that the pension may not be there. So I had a lot of folks that I worked with that were just about to retire, and they're like, you know what, young man, that pension may not be there. You should be investing as though it's not going to be there. And that stuck with me, and I've done that. So if I get to the end of my career, which is not too far away, and there is a pension, which in Connecticut it looks like there might be, I'll be in really, really great shape because I invested as though there was not going to be a pension.
It's an interesting point because I know my husband and the company he's worked with almost, I think, 29 years now. They had 401k, they had the matching, but my husband was actually smart because he diversified. And even though he maxed out on the employer stock and how that all works with the retirement, he also invested in other stocks because when the company went bankrupt, he lost some of his retirement, but he didn't lose it all because he had diversified and he had coworkers. They lost a lot of money after being with the company for 20, 30 years because the company matched 100%. Why would you invest in other things? But the diversification is important as well.
That's tough to hear. That kind of stuff would keep me up at night. So I think that people need to learn, even if you're just starting out, what does diversification mean and how do I do it? It's not rocket science. You can actually buy one stock ticker and be diversified in the entire American stock market.
Yeah. And you have to be willing to go and ride the highs and lows. If you buy a stock and 2 months later it goes down, you really should hold it because you've got to watch what you're doing and things like that. So Abigail, you talk about the savings account that you've had since you were 9 years old, talking about your retirement. So how did that shape as, getting older, going into high school, going into college, going into life? Like how did that kind of set you apart from some of your friends or just how you were doing things from other people that you saw?
It's incredible to me. I find it so frustrating that high schools and college life skill courses don't teach anything about retirement or not accruing debt. Like I left high school not knowing how to write a check. I should probably be really embarrassed to admit that, but I think it's an injustice.
Yeah, you're not the only one, but yeah. So you didn't know how to write a check, but you had a savings account. So you knew how to save. You just didn't know how to spend it or write that check to pay for things.
Yeah, I think as a society, we're so quick to judge people who accumulate debt, but then we don't also equip them with the knowledge and skills to manage it. So it's kind of like a catch-22. Again, if I didn't have parents who taught me some of this, and then on my own, I ended up getting sucked down a rabbit hole in college. I don't even remember how I discovered Dave Ramsey and Clark Howard. I discovered their books at the local library. I don't know what made a 20-something-year-old pick them up, honestly. But if I didn't do that research myself, I'd probably be racked with credit card debt and just blowing my money. And the other thing I think is important to point out is, again, owe this to my parents. They really drove home, we'll help you with college to an extent, but you need to get a job part-time. And if you choose to go to an Ivy League school where you're going to get a fine arts degree and you come out and you can't get a job, that's your problem. And you better figure out how you're going to pay off that debt. And so as a result, I lived at home and I got that part-time job and I went to a state university. And I went to the local campus, so it was even cheaper.
And there's nothing wrong with doing that. A lot of kids nowadays going to community college is very helpful. That good first step, not just from an academic perspective, but from a financial perspective as well. So you had the savings account, the financial literacy, and you're right. High schools, colleges, they're trying. I know in our local school district, they do talk about financial literacy, but there's no follow through. There's no discussion about debt. There's no everyday kind of situations. And I think it's important that we talk about it. That's why I have this podcast, to talk about it, because it's important. I learned, and I'm sure you did, also watching my parents. They never really talked to me about finances and money. Now, I'm blessed because I guess I'm an accountant. I went into the world of finance, so I had a little bit of a leg up. But I never really learned it from my parents with them showing me. It was a lot of observation. And I think we're trying to get away from that and talking to kids about that. How about you, Keith?
Yeah, I grew up and our family didn't have a lot of money. My dad busted his butt on 3 jobs sometimes just to make ends meet. My mother was a librarian, so not a lot of money. And I didn't quite learn about money, but I did start out, unfortunately, with a scarcity mindset in money. And that followed me for a long time. And some of the most famous people, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, say a scarcity mindset will hold you back more than anything else. People have to remember that money is infinite. There's infinite money out there. So I had to break free of that, and it took a long time. And I eventually did. And boy, when I did, everything changed. Once you see through that veil of that scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, you start taking risks. And through those risks, not all of them work out, but some of them work out really well. And that's been my journey that way. I did learn about money by listening. There was 1 or 2 people in my life that weren't afraid to talk about it. It wasn't through my family, but it was through other people. And I also saw people that I wanted to emulate. I know now that was the wrong thing to do because there are people who are rich and people who appear rich. And I probably was watching the people who appeared wealthy rather than the people who were wealthy.
Because you don't know, they appear wealthy, but how much debt are they in? Have they maxed out their retirement? Have they made good choices? And there's nothing wrong with appearing to be wealthy, but it is a balance of, can you really sustain yourself in how you're living? And talking about keeping up with the Joneses, never judge a book by its cover because you just don't know.
Yeah, and I teach in a wealthy district, and it's amazing and heartbreaking to hear about people who have all of these things. But if they hit a financial roadblock, they're in real trouble. They're making $150,000 each a year, maybe 2 in the same household, yet they're still paycheck to paycheck. I would rather model myself off of somebody who makes less, but is building that net worth up. And I think that's tremendously important.
Yeah, building equity, building the understanding. So, your backgrounds, like coming together for both of you, how did you balance your viewpoints, both of you seeing the world when it comes to the finances and having those conversations? My husband and I, we were very blessed when we left college. We had no debt. We did buy a house then at that point, trying to get ourselves established. And my husband's big thing was he didn't want to be house poor. He didn't want to be tied to the house and not have some financial leeway. And while we live in a smaller home in our community and we have friends who have larger homes or have more and do stuff, it doesn't set us necessarily apart because we still have been able to raise our boys, have a family, do things that we want to do, and hopefully financially secure ourselves for our future and our retirement as well. And we've had our fights, we've had our arguments, and we're still together almost 27, 28 years, well, 30 some years with college. But like, how do you guys talk about these things from where you came from and where you are now?
I guess I'll start on this one. When we first met and started dating, we didn't talk about money. I don't remember talking about money once. And that was the simple part of it. We just didn't talk about money. We've been together for over 6 years. And once we started to do more together, going on vacations, I own my own house. So when Abigail started to visit here and things like that, the subject had to come up. Now, 5 years ago, I wasn't anywhere near where I am today in understanding how to talk about finances. I think I'm a little bit more comfortable talking about finances than I was 5 years ago. And again, I attribute that to the financial independence to retire early community that often talks about how to have those conversations. So I'll tell a little story that gives an idea of like how I wasn't good at it. And Abigail is probably going to throw things at me later on this one. But we happened to be going on a date somewhere, and Abigail had been staying over more, and I foolishly, in the car when there's no escape, started the conversation about Abigail contributing towards some of the bills in the house. And I did it in the wrong way, and I just said it rather than giving any background or asking about how Abigail felt. I just said, hey, I think it would be appropriate if you contributed a little bit towards the heat and electricity now that you're staying there. Anybody who's listening knows that doesn't go very well, especially when there's no escape. You're in the car for an hour. That was probably the low point of my idiocy when talking about money. And I worked my way up from there, I'm hoping. Abigail can expand upon that, hopefully.
So, Abigail, from your perspective, how did you feel and how did you kind of rectify or work through that?
So I think we're in an interesting dynamic, and that was part of the reason I was excited to come on this podcast, because I was hesitant about whether I wanted to share about my personal situation, but I think we need to normalize this. So I still live at home, and that is because I help provide care for my grandmother and my mother, who both have disabilities. I also live with 2 chronic health conditions myself, and so my medical bills are very, very high. And so that allows me to at least save on paying rent for now. And that's part of the reason that Keith and I have started these conversations, but we haven't actually moved in together yet. But when he brought it up, I realized that the reason I got defensive is because, much like Keith, I didn't realize how alike we were in terms of having that scarcity mindset. But for me, it wasn't necessarily because I was raised with a lack of money, but in my early 20s to mid 20s, there were points where things were not going so well health-wise, and there were years where my medical bills were probably $20,000.
Wow.
Like, it ate up a significant portion of my annual salary. And so once I took a step back and said, what he's asking for is reasonable, I was able to maturely have that conversation with him, because I also hadn't had a conversation like that with anyone. So I had to reset my mindset, and we were able to just figure out what made sense.
And talk about it too. Like maybe in that instant in the car you couldn't, but coming back around probably and taking that time. And thank you for sharing. Talking about personal things on podcasts sometimes can be a little nerve-wracking, and how are people going to, react? But I think it's relatable, and I agree with you. We have to talk about it. Hey, it's time for a money break. Welcome back from our money break. Okay, so your situation financially, having these conversations, you've been together 6 years now. What else have you guys really been able to sit down and talk about or share that can help others in these situations, whether they're married or in a partnership or dating. It's still a serious relationship, but you're talking about these things, how to go about having those conversations. And you're doing it from a place of love, caring. You want to be with this person. I read some articles recently about people dating nowadays. They look at people's finances before they go on a date because they want to know, is this person financially stable? And you could be financially stable and still have debt, but you're stable because you're able to pay your debt down. You're able to do things and not feel overwhelmed. I'm far removed from the dating scene. My kids are in the dating age, but finances is very important for young adults.
Yeah, I think Abigail and I are very lucky. We actually can have these conversations without killing each other. And actually, they've been very, very, very constructive. And again, I'm not going to say that I'm some kind of genius around this, but I've listened to so many podcasts and read so many blogs about this very thing. And the idea is, rather than saying, this is how I view money, you say, hey, what's the 7 most important things to you? And then you look at that list and you say, okay, 2 of those cost money, 5 of those don't. That's what the average I've seen, because our school, actually, where I teach, has a very robust personal finance program. And that's one of the things that they ask kids. And it's often 1 or maybe 2 things that actually cost money. So then you can actually go from there and have a conversation about those 1 or 2 things. The other 5 should be easy to do, or at least you can get them done if you have the will to do them. The other 2 about money, you can slowly start talking about that. My favorite thing is make it a separate date, and everybody should know the score before you go on that date. So Abigail and I both love coffee. I love coffee, good coffee. So what we'll do, and we always talk about this ahead of time, whether it's, are we going out to strategize about the podcast? Are we going out to talk about our next vacation? Are we going out to talk about things that are going on at the house? Or are we going out and talking about none of these things? If people know the score ahead of time, it becomes much more manageable. Rather than getting your coffee, sitting down, you're expecting to have a conversation about movies, and the other person's like, hey, I wanted to talk to you about buying the tickets for this particular trip now. And bam, you put on your heels. And especially when it's a high cost situation, people should be able to ramp up. And for some people, that takes a long time, and they might end up trying to avoid that particular thing. But if you make it a very bookended, we're just going to talk about this for 15 minutes and everybody has an out. Don't do it in the car on a 13-hour drive to South Carolina, something like that, because you can't escape. So there's got to be some escape for people to take some time, separate, think about it, come back, add to the conversation, and always don't compare their methods to yours, but ask where they're coming from. There's probably, for every single person, a very good reason why they're doing things a certain way. And it might even be better that way than what you have. And I've learned just as much from Abigail about money than anybody else. And that's been very valuable to me.
Yeah. How about you, Abigail?
I would agree with Keith on that. You have to understand your partner's fears. So for me, I still sometimes have to get over feeling intimidated having these conversations with him, partially because even though I'm organized, he is uber organized. You have to see his spreadsheets.
Ooh, I love
they're
spreadsheets.
Incredible. Oh, yes. He breaks it down. He knows where every dollar goes. It's really impressive. And this is from someone who I had a fear, for example, of credit cards for a long time. I didn't open one until my mid-20s because I have worked with hoarders over the years, people having insane levels of debt. And I'm just always so afraid that one day I'm going to become that person who buys outside of their means.
I think you're right. Credit cards are very scary for people. And I think the biggest thing is when you pay for things by credit cards, although now everything's done a lot more digitally, we have third-party apps, buy through Venmo, buy through PayPal, which you attach your debit or credit card to, and can make that debt seem bigger than it really is. I think people need to remember that you're only giving yourself a month reprieve from paying that expense back. And you have to be able to try. And that was something my father did teach me, and my husband and I both agreed is if you can pay your credit card in full every month, try to do that. So of course, no interest, it doesn't add on and doesn't always work. We've had some tight times and I've had to carry a balance. And that killed me with my credit card to carry that balance. But you have to be able to sustain and be able to pay that credit card back to avoid the debt and the fees. I think it's very important. So how did you feel? You opened up this credit card. So how did you eventually get over that fear? Or are you still fearful of the credit card?
I have definitely become more relaxed. I don't know if Keith would agree, but I think over the years, in terms of spending money on things that matter. So I'm definitely tighter than I need to be because, again, I just always have this paranoia that I'm going to have high medical bills again in the future. So I always plan for the worst. And I also mull over even the small purchases when I don't have to. But the two places that I feel very lucky Keith and I see eye to eye on in terms of spending are food. We always prioritize healthy, good food, and vacation because we both acknowledge, and we talk about this a lot, you have to invest in your physical and mental health to have a higher quality of life short and long term. And that's just going to make your relationship healthier too.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think you're right. Having that plan, having a budget or a spending plan, having an idea of what money's coming in, what money's going out, what money am I saving, and where can I go out to dinner or go to the movies or go on a vacation, go on a trip, that kind of thing. And I think being transparent with each other is important. And when you go away, things do cost more now. I'm not going to lie. I'm not saying people aren't having stress about it, but there are still ways to look at your money, especially if you're budgeting or doing a spending plan where you know what's coming in. You can plan for that. And Keith, Uber with your spreadsheets, which I love. Like I said, I love spreadsheets and down to the penny. And it's funny because when I started out in accounting, I started auditing and we would audit. And if we were off 5 cents, it's immaterial, right? That 5 cents is immaterial. But I also understand how some people, it's important to every little penny. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And it's just giving you that relief or just comfort knowing, okay, I know where all my money is. But it's also okay to spend it if you want to.
Yeah. And this is the other part of the relationship talk that we're having. I budget the heck out of everything. In fact, when Sunday mornings, I wake up and I'm giddy. I make my coffee and even my friends know this. I sit down at my computer for 2 to 3 hours and I budget, do all of my budget. Then I start looking for that aggregation of marginal gains. Is there a place where I can improve my finances by 1% each week? So can you lower a subscription? Can you cancel a subscription? Can you call your insurance company and say, hey, listen, can we just review my insurance? Can I get rid of PMI off my house somehow? Okay, so all of these little things, if you make one improvement every single week, just watching your net worth grow from that and your money gaining velocity is unbelievable. And for me, like I was saying before, I sit down and the last two things that come up in that sit down is my net worth. And I love watching that crawl up every week. And sometimes it shoots up, sometimes it doesn't. As you can imagine, like the past 2 days has been pretty tough as far as the markets go. But the other thing that I do is all of those spreadsheets are all tied into one number at the end. And that's my what's called financial independence age and date. So I want to move that financial independence date closer to where I am. And I've been able to do that very rapidly over the past 5 years, not because I'm making a ton of money. I'm a public school teacher. But if you know about your money, then you can move towards that much easier. With all that being said, getting back to the original point of this, I didn't know for a long time. I thought everybody did that.
Oh, no, they don't.
Yes.
I don't even do that.
I thought everybody did that, right? Who doesn't want to know where every one of their dollars is going?
I mean, don't get me wrong. I know where all my money is, but I don't sit down in a spreadsheet for hours. And you would think I would, but I don't.
Well, they say mechanics have the worst cars, right? Because that's what they do all day. So the point is I have to temper that because I would talk to anybody about specific numbers all day long. Finances are my favorite thing to talk about. It is not a great way to start a relationship in talking about these numbers. So it's important for folks like me, and we all know who we are out there, is you temper and you start instead of this is how I do things and it's the right way. What are your fears? What are the things you care about? And what's your overall idea of money as a thing? Start there. Don't start with you know how much electricity costs every month in my house?
Right.
So I just think that relationship-wise, that's probably the best way to start. And that's harder for people like me.
And I think it's harder for a lot of people. And I think, again, because finances do play a role mentally and just in our daily lives and the way the economy is going and just things that people are talking about, things being more money, you know, you're paying more and getting less kind of thing, that kind of frustration. And you bring up a point, that 1%, you try to say, what can I save on every week or get better on? And that idea of saving, I talk a lot about my podcast about save $1. If you can put $1 away every time you go through, it builds up not only the money, but your habit of saving and putting money away. And it doesn't have to be, the rule of thumb is 20% of your pay should go into savings. It doesn't have to be that. You should have 3 to 6 months of emergency savings. It doesn't have to be that, especially when you're first starting out figuring this all out. Just try to put something away and then seeing that growth. I mean, you could say, don't go to Starbucks every day to get your coffee. Coffee connoisseur, can I get all the funky coffee machines that they have out now and have it at home and save myself time and money? Because it takes time to go to a Starbucks or another place to get a coffee. So those things can matter, you know, reviewing all that. And it's weird. I have a lot of our finances in my head, but I have to sit down and have those conversations with my husband. And we use QuickBooks actually to track everything. And he has access to it. I'm like, you have to take a look at everything. And he does. He pays attention, but I take care of all that because that's just what I do. But I still want him to know what is in the checking account, what bills are due, when they're due, how much they are, and why I'm paying a little bit more money for something and things like that. So is there anything else with regards to relationships and talking about money and kind of anything else you'd like to share? Any other tips or insights you'd like to share with my listeners on that idea of being in a relationship with somebody and having to have those tough conversations?
So I had a unique job for a little while where I was actually a pastor. And I did a lot of weddings. And part of the wedding process is you have to meet with the pastor ahead of time to talk about a few certain things so the pastor feels good about going forward. And for me, the most interesting one was always money. And I cannot believe how many people got to that point in their relationship when they hadn't talked about money at all. Simple
you'd
things.
You'd be surprised, yeah.
Yeah, simple things like buy a house or rent. Sometimes they go, oh, I'd like to rent. The other one goes, wait a minute, I thought we were going to buy a house. And then all of a sudden, that's the first time you're having that conversation. How many children? I know that doesn't sound like a financial thing, but it is.
Children are expensive. I love my kids. Don't get me wrong. I love having my boys. They're both in college now. But yeah, they add burden in that regard. It's not just the clothing and feeding them, but do you have to make the decision that one parent or partner stay home and help raise the kids while the other one's working? Now you're down to one income instead of two incomes. Or do you put them into daycare? Well, is the daycare, eating through all your money because you're both working? Even though you're both working, putting them into daycare or having a nanny or something, babysitter full-time could still eat into that as well. So those are important things to talk about, yes.
Yeah, and I think that the meeting right before you get married for anybody is probably too late to have those conversations. And you don't have to hammer these big conversations ahead of time. Like I was saying before, find out what's important to the person. And I mean, you should be doing that anyway in a good relationship, I think. I'm not an expert, but come on. I think you should be probably finding out what's important to the other person. And I bet you a lot of that is around money. For instance, are you thinking of retiring? What do you want to do when you retire? Do you have debt? That's a tough question to ask people. And by the way, how do you feel about debt? Is it something that you should have? Or are you the Dave Ramsey, if you have $1 of debt, your hair is on fire and all of the world is crashing down and you have to attend to that debt immediately? So these are important things because I've seen things fall apart when people don't have those conversations.
I'm sure you have. How about you, Abigail? Any other insights or tips or things like that regarding relationships and money?
I always say, and this isn't just regarding money, but I think it's the most important piece, you have to know how to fight with your partner. You have to understand their argument style. And when I say that, so just to give an example to illustrate, Keith and I have very different argument styles. And I'm the type, if I am mad, go away.
Right.
Like, give me space, let me digest and analyze. I'm a thick analyzer of everything. And then when I'm ready, I'll come to you and say, okay, let's talk. I'm calmer now. Keith is the type who's like, I want to fix this now. Let's talk about it no matter what. And I've had to say to him, no, this is not how I work. Please come back in 5 minutes. And then with time, he has learned, I don't even have to say it anymore. He lets me process, and then we're able to have a civil conversation and work through things and find a common ground.
Yeah, I think it's important, and especially with money. And don't get me wrong, my husband and I have had some fights, and I'm more of the fiery one. I think he's the one that also has to process it. And so I have to learn, okay, I got to step off, let him think about it. But it goes both ways sometimes depending on the topic. So besides that, is there anything else with debt or money that you wanted to share, Abigail? Anything else that might be of importance for people to maybe be aware of or go, oh, I hadn't thought of that?
I think we've kind of broached it, but I would just drive home. You need to understand the emotions that money holds for your partner, or the relationship is going to go south.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think, Keith, you had mentioned about one person has debt and the other person's idea about debt. And I don't think that people that don't have any debt should only be the people that get together with each other. People that have debt should get together with each other. I think it's that balance of, okay, I have debt. Here's why I have the debt. It could be credit card debt. It could be student loan debt. That's a whole big thing as well. And it's not that you're not trying to pay that down or don't want to have freedom from that, but you're in a situation in your life that you have that, and you have to find ways to do that. So is there anything for our young adults, just in general, that you want to share from a money perspective that they need to be aware of, maybe think about? Because you have kids in, 18, 25, 30-year age range that, with everything digital now and how they work with things, the idea of like budgeting and cash doesn't always absorb to them to understand what are they supposed to do with it. Abigail, is there anything you'd like to share with my young adult listeners, things that maybe they should be aware of when it comes to money?
I can share what I always tell my nephews, and that's every nickel counts. So if you open a bank account and you at least get started where you're saving money in a fund of some sort, whether it's a CD, what have you, where you at least are getting some interest, that is a good start.
Okay, great. Great. How about you, Keith?
So when I speak to kids about money, or even anybody in their 20s, I say, can you imagine hiring an employee that works 24 hours a day for you, never complains, never asks for anything, and is continually doing only one thing, and that's trying to build you wealth? Every single dollar you put aside is that. It is just an employee that will never quit. It'll never stop working for you. Why wouldn't you want to collect as many of those as you can? Because
yeah, I like that idea.
It's just, they will continue to work for you for the rest of your life. And if you have 30 years, on average, money doubles every roughly 7 to 8 years. Think about that. That is an unbelievable power. If you wait till your 50s to start, you can never catch up. But if you start, oh my goodness, if you started at 18 years old, and there's a saying, if you just put money away, $100 a month for the whole of your career, just $100 a month, and you don't look at it, when you open up that account when you're about to retire, have a cardiologist right next to you, because you're going to have a heart attack as to the amount of money that is.
I think that's great. Think of it as an employee. And as I mentioned before, you have to kind of ride those highs and lows when it comes to money as well and looking at everything. So this has been wonderful. I've really been enjoyed chatting with you guys. I am so excited you guys decided connecting and coming on. I want to shout out again for your podcast, Global Treasures, where you talk about an overview of the history, legends, and people that make UNESCO World Heritage Sites so unique and amazing to human history and culture. And like I said, I've already started to listen to several of the episodes, and it's really intriguing. I don't travel that much, so for me to be able to travel without having to get on an airplane, it's good. Because I'll get on airplanes, but I don't like it. So definitely check out Global Treasures on Podbean or wherever you listen to your podcasts. So thank you guys so much for joining me. This has been great.
Thank you. This has been awesome.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hey, it's Your Financial Maven, and I want to hear from you. Feel free to leave me your insights and money stories or questions that you may have about money. You can visit www.yourfinancialmavenpodcast.com and click on the I Want to Hear From You tab. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about money. The purpose of this podcast is to provide general information on the subjects discussed. It is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. You should consult your CPA, accountant, or tax professional for all of your specific financial needs or situations. Your Financial Maven is hosted and produced by Samantha M. Besnoff, CPA, and Your Financial Maven, LLC. Editing is done by Kris Zarnoch of KMZen Creative. Music is written, composed, and performed by Daniel Shore.